Welcome to the Conservative Alliance podcast. This is everything from a libertarian conservative twist. I'm James, your host, and today we're talking about coronavirus and the government's response. I'm joined by Scott Thomas.
Hi.
And Chris Wilkinson.
Hello there.
It's great to have you here with me today. Today's show, as it is our first one, I want to introduce myself as the founder and head of Conservative Alliance, why I set it up, and what my vision is for Conservative Alliance. As I've already mentioned, we have Scott Thomas and Chris Wilkinson on the Conservative Alliance podcast. They're here today to discuss with me the action the government is taking in response to the coronavirus from the perspective of a Conservative and Libertarian Party member. They will be providing their expertise in politics and international relations. Scott Thomas is a history and politics graduate who is currently the head of research for Conservative Alliance, and Chris Wilkinson is the Staffordshire Libertarian Group Leader and the host of Libertarian Listener. Thank you both for joining us. I want to start by introducing Conservative Alliance. Conservative Alliance is a think tank which was created by the Libertarian Conservative Group with the aim of promoting a broad range of conservative ideas through discussion, policy research and development. Conservative Alliance combines conservative thinking and values, prioritising liberty as its core value whilst promoting freedom of expression, freedom of choice, and free market capitalism. We reject attempts at social engineering from the left wing of the political spectrum and advocate key conservative principles such as fiscal discipline, respect for contracts, defence of private property, and the principle of the free market. We place a strong emphasis on self-assistance and freedom of choice under a laissez-faire and economically liberal capitalist society, with key social tenets such as valuing key aspects of Judeo-Christian morality alongside a framework of limited constitutional monarchy and representative government. Our concerns range from the removal of individual freedoms, the gradual dismantling of freedom of speech, the continued expansion of the state, and we also believe that the possibilities are endless when a free and creative mind is allowed to flourish in an environment which embraces freedom of ideas and speech. In the years following Brexit, I have become dissatisfied in the way our country was being run and decided to take a step back from party politics, feeling politically homeless. Being a traditional libertarian conservative at heart, I believe in Brexit as a way for this country to rediscover its place in the world, to prosper and thrive. This, however, was not being delivered by the so-called Conservative Party and exposed how all the mainstream political parties were the same, and there was a huge void in British politics, where small parties and their candidates who voiced opinions were drowned out by mainstream political parties who no longer represented the values we, as an organisation, seek in our society. This ultimately led me to join the Libertarian Party UK. My vision for Conservative Alliance is to be working on multiple platforms to connect with politicians, the media, and most importantly, the public, in order to provide factual information to encourage open and honest discussion, which we believe will help revive traditional libertarian conservatism in Great Britain and the wider world. Projects that Conservative Alliance undertake will cover a wide range of topics and subjects which concern every single conservative and beyond. This can be historical research into the destruction of conservative values like freedom of speech, freedom of choice, and how these historical events can have ramifications in the present day as we regress towards losing the values our ancestors fought with their lives to protect. The overall goal of the Conservative Alliance is to create a platform where all citizens of a right of centre persuasion in British politics and the wider world can unite and work together for the benefit of this great nation and worldwide by challenging the growing consensus of social and economic interventionism. I would like to point out that through all of that I was stuttering. I'm not very good at reading from a speech, but I was not going to memorise all of that. But with that being said, we're now going to move on to talk about the coronavirus and the government's response. As of today, the 24th of March 2020, the British government have enacted strict curbs on life in the country to try and curb the effect coronavirus is having on our country. The new guidance says people should leave their homes for the following: shopping for basic necessities, such as food and medicine. Shopping trips should be made as infrequent as possible. One form of exercise a day, such as a walk, a run, or cycle. This should be done alone or with people you live with. Any medical need or to provide care, or to help a vulnerable person. This includes moving children under the age of 18 between their parents' home where applicable, key workers, or those with children identified as vulnerable who can continue to take their children to school, traveling to and from work. Even when following the above guidance, people should minimize the amount of time spent out of their homes and should keep 2 meters, that's 6 feet, away from people who they do not live with. The government is also stopping all social events, including weddings, baptisms, and other ceremonies, but funerals attended by immediate family members are allowed. Cabinet Office Michael Gove says that if people do not follow these rules, the police would have the tools to ensure that they are penalised and punished if they put others' lives at risk. Now, this is my ultimate concern, the powers assigned to the police for the quote-unquote greater good. Now, the floor is open to either one of you. What do you think of the current action the government has taken in response to coronavirus?
Depends on what area you tackle it from, an ideological perspective or a practical, more of a practical application of politics.
Like, when you say practical application of politics, what do you mean exactly?
Well, I basically mean like the reality of politics in Britain, from a society point of view, from what the electorate would want, long-term strategy planning, as well.
What are you trying to mean in the sense of their electability in the future?
Of course, you've always got to think about electability. Government's main priority, elected government anyway, is to maintain office.
You got anything to say to that, Chris? Being the Libertarian, of course.
Well, I think I'll just state my position on what I think has happened. I think that the government has, up until about 9 days ago, which was the 15th of March, their strategy was the herd immunity strategy.
Which would have strategy.
Well, maybe, but I don't think it is. 60% of people under that strategy would have been infected with the disease, and the estimated death count would have been about 1.5 million potentially. That's obviously not a good thing because it doesn't save people's lives. And naturally, being a libertarian, the right to life is a very high priority. What happened 9 days ago was that the government changed their strategy and actually started to act upon it. But they have acted in a way which takes account of their inaction from the end of January thereabouts, when this was known to be a developing illness throughout the world. So in other words, they've done very little at the beginning, and now they're doing far too much to overcompensate their deficit of action.
Yeah, just trying to save face.
You see, with their strategy to begin with, I thought it was very, very good what they was doing, right? When people demanded things to happen, the majority, I was actually in the minority for a lot of things, but I can see it from their point of view. I acted upon the what the public wanted. So if the public wanted the schools shut, we shut them. If the public wanted this done, we do it. And then if everything goes tits up, to put it politely, they will not take responsibility and be like, you wanted it, you've got it.
So ultimately then, do you both feel that the government's response has been warranted? Or is the government being too irrational, thinking with their emotion and not with their heads? Just as you've said, Scott, that's your particular theory on why Boris Johnson's acting the way he is. Ultimately, are they thinking too much alongside with the public? Instead of acting like government and leading and being responsible, they're listening to Twitter, the emotion on Twitter, the emotion in the media, and just reacting to try and save face and polling figures.
Well, let's be honest, right? The economy, they've not looked at it logically in terms of the economy. The economy's gone. We'll come out of this into a recession. It's gone.
And we could talk about that more in a moment. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but in terms of, they can turn around and say, look, the economy's gone. Yeah, we've damaged it, but we've done it to save you. It's an emotional play put back onto the public, and actually, okay, he's done this for us now. And, it's a strategy which could actually work, to be fair.
It could work, yeah, but then as soon as we come out of it and the economy collapses, all this face saving is done now has been pointless, and it has broken a lot of things. It's given powers to the police that they should not have. 2 years of
Yep,
unchecked
yep.
powers, right? That they should
And
not
that's
have.
dangerous.
That's dangerous, yes, because
Yep.
any unchecked power ultimately leads to tyranny.
Yep.
They have put millions of people into bankruptcy, and for what? For polling that's going to collapse anyway, because there was already a recession looming, and this has just pushed it over the edge.
Well, they've only just put a cap on the length of time that these additional measures can be enacted for. I think it's 6 months now. It was going to be 2 years.
Yeah.
So they've already scaled that down.
They've scaled that down, but Parliament can review it. But ultimately, why is Parliament and the government going to go, oh, we don't need these powers anymore? Parliament, as long as Parliament can justify why it needs it, it's going to keep on having it. And Parliament can always justify why it needs power. It justified why it needed expenses.
Well, let's look at it like this as well. The virus itself, for the majority of people, it's going to be a mild illness.
Yeah.
So, like, I already know someone who's had it, and them getting over it slowly but surely, and they haven't required any medical assistance. They've just had to stay in bed. Obviously, you've got cases where people are going to die, but you've got cases of other illnesses where people are going to die anyway.
If we followed the winter flu, the seasonal flu like this, like they are doing now, I would be surprised to see what the results are, and I bet you what, it'd look very similar. I bet the transmission rate would be just as high, and I also bet the death rate would look just as similar. Thousands of deaths related to respiratory-related diseases.
It's very interesting. All of these statistics are now being sort of rendered meaningless because of the way in which the data is being used. If you actually look at the working age population for the coronavirus, the maximum death rate is 1%. It's not 3% or 4% or this, that, and the other, which is applicable to people who are over the age of 65. In certain areas of Wuhan in China, the death rate is 14% because it's in a very concentrated spot.
Yeah. Also, percentages are misleading.
Yeah.
Percentages. Percentages only work if you're looking at 1 million people and 1 million people, and then you look at the percentage that way. But right now, we're looking at a percentage for millions of people where seasonal flu and 300,000 people. So already the sampling data is off. So of course the percentages are going to look higher with coronavirus because it's a smaller sample.
We need to stop looking at all of these percentages. Start looking at the nominal data and take your inferences from that, because I think a lot of the government's reaction has been skewed because of the percentage data. They're listening to all of these medical specialists and all of these people who are telling them the worst possible scenarios with misleading extrapolations of data.
Yeah, but data though that is ultimately being fed by the World Health Organization. So who do you believe?
But this is why they're panicking and going for too much control, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's a panic. I'll be honest with you. I don't believe it's a panic, because at the end of the day, what has government got to panic about? Like, okay, 1% or 2% of the population die. This is more, in my opinion, this is more of a power grab, and it's being used as a ploy for that alone. Which I'm not saying that's a bad thing in terms of what Boris's agenda is, because I do honestly believe Boris has a long-term plan for his next election because of this, and it's going to project him forward. He's been in office less than a year. He's dealt with Brexit issues. He's dealt with this. He's actually, majority of what I can see on Facebook and what I'm hearing from people is that he's won a lot of hearts over by actually doing this. And I think if he continues on the trajectory he's on, he's going to do excellent because of this alone. And I don't believe that it's. I don't believe the government's being as emotionally has had an emotional response as much as we want to believe.
Emotionally driven.
Well, yeah. At the end of the day, they said no to begin with, and they said no.
No.
Their strategy originally was inhumane, so I find it hard to believe how suddenly the public have changed their minds. They say there's
was
like
it really
hashtags.
Inhumane? Like, let's be honest. Like, if you are at risk, stay home.
Of course, that's the responsibility of the individual, but a lot of
Scott,
people need the government to tell them these things.
I don't think.
And those people, in my opinion, like those are the ones who, to be quite honest, they venture off out into the wilderness. We leave them. We shut the doors behind them.
We're going on to Darwinism there, which I think again is a topic to come up later on. Not so particularly Darwinism, but just more on, are we ultimately overreacting? But we can of course discuss this later on. I just want to clarify one thing. You just said then, Chris, the government was being inhumane. Is that the opinions of the public or your own?
That would be my own opinion, but based on some of the things that I've since shared about. Obviously, the finally Boris hashtag goes some way to proving that is the thoughts. That's the thoughts of other people as well.
I would just say, though, anything involving hashtags and Twitter should just not be believed, because remember when everyone on Twitter was saying they don't know how the Conservative government could win, and that Labour was the only true.
Yeah.
I'm not discrediting your opinion, because I do understand how it could be seen as inhumane. But governments, I will just say this: when I refer to government, I'm not on about the Conservative Party or the Labour Party. If I'm going to talk about a party, I'll say a party. But when I say government, I'm on about the machine of the elected office, okay? For too long, it is worried about the minority opinion of Twitter users. Twitter users who generally tend to be left-wing, or at least on the liberal spectrum if you're American. They're not based on the normal... I've only recently gone on Twitter, and that's just for Conservative Alliance, and I don't understand how to use it. I don't understand the platform. I don't understand how it's useful.
It's not useful.
But that just shows you the kind of medium it is. Unless you understand what you're doing, and generally the left do, because they can only ever give you small sound bites, not a long argument, then, Twitter, just stop listening to it. And the news, it needs to calm down. They're acting as if we're being bombed by the Luftwaffe.
Well,
we're not.
You say when the media needs to calm down, but we're currently being told that if we leave our house to go for more than one walk a bloody day, we're going to get arrested or fined.
But remember, this is what the people wanted. But be careful with what you ask for, because once government gives it you, a government big enough to give you everything is also strong enough to take everything you have away. And people have got to be careful when they're asking for the government to give them things. Do never ask the government to give you anything. If you can't provide it for yourself, then that's that.
Yes, I fully agree. But the thing is, my area recently made the local news due to actually not the local news, national news, due to incidents at Tesco's and shopping centres nearby. The people in my area who I am surrounded with, and to be quite honest, I probably know half of them who went up there and was trying to ransack the place. But they don't care if you told them not to cross a line, like a police line. They'd cross it anyway. But there's a general disregard in the country for the rule of law, and I do put that down to the liberalisation of the police force.
I'd also put it down to the fact that this law can no longer be respected when, in turn, the law does not respect the individual.
I agree. But I will say this: do many people really fear the police when they, from what I've seen?
I do not fear the policeman as an individual, but I am afraid of the power that the institution holds. Because that institution could... Yeah. But I'm not afraid of the policeman, but I am afraid of the police, in the sense of they have this unlimited power to wield against you. And I say that in the sense of there are laws that exist, right, that we don't even know we're breaking. But if the policeman decides that you're breaking it, I bet they could, breaking any law, they could find some statute somewhere to say, you've broken the law on this. And you're like, wow, I didn't even know it exists. And they'll be like, wow, we didn't know either, but you're booked now under section whatever.
I've got to say this. Most police officers don't know the law. I've had loads of interactions with police officers. They do not know the law. I've quoted the law to them, and they have to get their phones out.
That's the problem.
Just have to look at the Crime Bodge channel on YouTube for all the things that you need to know about the modern police force.
But then ultimately, even if there isn't a law, they'll just go disturbance of the peace.
Well, yeah, they can do that, which is quite alarming as it is.
Yeah. So when you asked, are we afraid of the police? I'm not afraid of the policeman. I'm afraid of the police and the institution. I'm afraid of the power it holds. but not the policeman on its own. I'm not like one of those Black Lives Matter, afraid of the police. The policeman on his own is doing, he thinks he's doing a good job. Unfortunately, the powers behind him that are controlling him, like the puppet master, ultimately are not. Got anything to add to that, Chris? Or do you think we can move on?
I think the one thing I would add is that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that you're right there. To take one particular example, the 1984 5 miners' strike, in which the police were used in a political way to achieve the aims of the government, I think could very well be borne out in this instance as well.
Yeah.
One bit of anecdotal evidence is that I've got a friend in Nottingham who says that the University of Nottingham halls of residence have been requisitioned by members of the armed forces. I can only assume that the establishment is getting ready for either mass riots or mass looting or just generally crimes en masse. And I think that this will be true in about 2 weeks' time, I think.
I agree 100%.
We can, of course. Do you want to carry on discussing, of course, what we've been seeing and what we expect? Or I think this would link into a question in a bit that I've got on my my sheet here. So, do you want to move on to the next question?
I'll just add, I'm quite surprised that there hasn't already been a major force, a sort of uprising force or anything like that coming from
the
anyone.
People or the government?
From the people. They're just taking this. They're just taking this and are being incredibly docile in the face of what is a severe restriction of their civil liberties and freedoms.
I think they'd be like that to some degree because it's never happened before in this country. On top of that, people do not believe that the police actually have the manpower to do anything about it. So ultimately, just like with all laws that exist, they're going to be disregarded. And even if you bring in the army, what are we talking? 108,000 soldiers? That's the entire force of the army, by the way, not frontline soldiers. 108,000, right? On top of that, the police. They won't be able to police the entire country.
Boris did. Yeah.
No, go on. No, it's all right. It's all right. It's the only problem doing it virtually instead of face to face like we'd normally like to do.
Yeah, that's because of the delay there. Boris did promise 20,000 extra police officers. I'm just wondering how many of those have already been recruited.
Very nominal, I bet, because now you need to have a degree or get onto the degree apprenticeship scheme to become a police officer. So I don't think any at all.
Let's be honest though, like the degree apprenticeship police officers are actually introducing, it's a load of rubbish because what they need to do is basically learn. I think I've said this before to you, James. We do have a very diverse society in terms of people interactions. The police just need to learn basic public relations skills. I do honestly believe, as well as their own laws, which but there is a lack of public skills when you interact with your daily police officer. I say daily. I don't know who would be the daily police officer, but for example, if I've interacted with transport police before, and that they instantly judge you based upon what you're wearing, what you're sort of how you speak as well. Like if you speak, I've noticed it myself. If you speak a little bit chavvy, they're a little bit more hostile and all of that. But some people, especially in my area, are a little bit more that way inclined, let's say.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if you don't mind, I will just summarise it because I don't want us getting off topic and off tangent. What we've basically identified here is a big distrust, not in the policemen, but in the police. And this is because our society overall has degraded over the last century. Could you imagine 100 years ago us being afraid of the police or afraid of any power that the police was given?
Well, I'll be honest. I'd probably be more scared of the police back then than I am now.
But back then, the structure was different.
No, but I'll tell you why. Back then, if you messed around, say as a kid, they give you a clip around the ear. They give you a slap.
Good.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. That's my argument. I'm not. If I was a kid now, say 13, and the police started like telling me to move or something, I'd probably give them some lip. Back then, if they could slap me back, I probably wouldn't do it. It's a preventative measure. Like, you're scared of them because you don't want to be faced with force.
But
And
as an adult, would you be scared of them?
So it's kind of
As
like
a child, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like power projection versus actual power.
yeah,
Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
yeah.
So soft power. So back then the police had soft power, and now they've actually got power backed up by ridiculous laws and a broken judiciary system.
Soft power weren't coined until the 1980s, but it certainly is.
Same principle.
It certainly is soft power. Like, it's a threat. For example, you find in households today, like, if you've got a father who's a little bit more strict, and you rebel against him. Say you rebel against your mother, and your mother says, "Wait till your father gets back." I don't know if anyone else ever had that, but I used to get that all the time, and I used to be a lot more scared of like my father than my mom, because my dad's stronger than my mom. So I feared, the bloke coming to get me effectively. It's simple psychology. It's basically, if you're scared of something or you fear the repercussions of something, you're not going to do it, or you're going to at least think twice.
That's absolutely fine. With all that being said, though, we're focused right now on the government and the government's henchmen. Okay, but what do you make of the response from the individual? I think it's very alarming. If I just pull a few things out: panic buying, aggression towards one another, no regard for anyone, just themselves. What does this show us? What kind of country has developed over the last century when we've turned away from each other and common solidarity to a me and I situation where no one else matters? What would you say is the fault of this? Is it the failure of community and society, or is it a failure in our economy, or both?
There's different factors. If you look at it, it's not just economy. It's breakdown of like community through different avenues, really. Obviously people are more distant in general to each other, like, but you've got loads of different issues. It depends on the community as well. Like, I imagine I live in a different area to you. You live in the countryside, James. I imagine my community in general, even if you go back 100 years ago, would be, well, no, 50 years ago, would be very different to your community 50 years ago. So I don't know. It's different factors.
What I'm trying to pin it down on is what I think. Okay, the economy has failed the individual over the last century, right? To the point now where cost of living is not met by the salary that you're receiving. That can be blamed on tax levels. That can be blamed on minimum wage. That can also be blamed on corporatism. Now, I say corporatism, not capitalism, because I do believe capitalism is a good thing. But corporatism, where the big corporations are being hoisted up by government, is a bad thing. So people are living paycheck to paycheck. There's a recent study done in the United States, right? Again, I know this isn't relevant to the UK, but it does show around the world what's happening, because it's happening in America, all this panic buying as well. The average worker, there's millions of them, by the way, they make up the largest proportion of the population, are living paycheck to paycheck. And if they have a big expenditure, they roughly can afford to pay $400. That's all they've got in the savings. So that's gone already with the announcements of a lockdown. So no wonder people are panicking when they're like, well, who's going to pay my bills? And then you've got on the other flip coin where people are not worried about their economical situation, arguing with them, going, well, why aren't you doing this for the greater good? And the simple response to that is, you're not paying their bills. Their bills ultimately still need to be paid at the end of the day. I know the government said, oh, here's a 3-month suspension on your mortgages, but it still needs to be paid back. Well, and then on a societal level, right, I myself am guilty of this. I do not know who lives on my street, in the sense of, I know one next door neighbour, I do not know the rest. And you used to be able to. You mentioned the miners' strikes before. I don't agree with them personally, but community came together then. The wives would all cook food for each other while the husbands went out on strike. There was that solidarity where in the worst of times you looked after one another, whether that be social bad times or economic bad times.
I think that's very true to say of this particular situation. I think certainly in terms of the reaction that I've got to some of the things I've said regarding the coronavirus, people are pushing very extreme left-wing political messages in a crisis that is ultimately to do with health.
Yeah.
I don't agree with what they're doing at all.
No.
But you've got to. I think the reason why this is, the reason why the left of today says the things it says, is because it simply bears no relevance to the real world. It has come to a point where all of the things that Labour in the UK wanted to achieve have been achieved.
Yeah, by
If you
a
look at
Conservative Party.
yeah, mostly. But if you look at things like all the minimum wage stuff done, gender equality, women in work, that sort of stuff, that was all done in the
Gay
70s.
marriage.
Same-sex marriage.
In the
Well,
decades.
that was Conservatives who introduced that.
Yeah, that's what we're saying.
But
No.
basically, it's all the things. Yeah, it's all the things that the Labour Party and what socialism wants to be and represent. They've all been done. So it tries to grab onto whatever it can. So at the moment, it's hijacked the green agenda. The party of the 1980s, the 80s Labour Party, didn't give a stuff about the environment. They didn't
gave us
really
stuff
have
about the workers.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the Labour Party of today, it's quite ironic. They care more about the minority vote than the workers. It's, in my opinion, obviously you'd have people who come out strong Labour supporters who say that's not the case.
The Labour Party hasn't cared for the worker in a long time, otherwise it wouldn't argue for minimum wage.
But this is the sort of
minimum wage only benefits those at the bottom anyway, which is what the Labour Party appeals to.
It doesn't benefit anyone.
It doesn't benefit anyone. It allows companies to pay you the worst possible rate they can and allow the state to subsidise the rest instead of paying you for the value that you actually provide to the company.
And it destroys your saving.
There's a flip side to that. For example, say someone at McDonald's, and I've got someone in my head when I'm saying this, who's very lazy, he's got no qualifications whatsoever. He goes in, he gets a £8, whatever minimum wage is now, job straight off the bat. No messing around. Realistically, you'd want to only pay him about £4. He's not worth anything. However, he's benefiting from it. There's always someone who will benefit from this, and it is always those right at the bottom. I don't mean they've came out of school and they've done reasonably well. I mean people right at the bottom who's got nothing benefit from minimum wage. Those are the only people who benefit from it, and that's my argument. Like, you will find people bottom of the barrel who will benefit from it.
I would say that if the minimum wage had actually been uprated in line with what it was originally supposed to be uprated with, that is the marginal labour product of a particular worker in the economy, I think it would have actually come about to be a much better policy, and actually a very useful policy, because it's tied into economic theory. But successive governments of Labour and Conservative over the past 20 years have uprated it in line with inflation, and that's the wrong thing to do.
Well, it's led to a situation where we're at now, when if you're just keeping it in line with inflation, you're living paycheck to paycheck. So people are going out panic buying, worrying that they will not be able to get their items in a few weeks' time.
And the thing is as well,
their economic pressure.
And the thing is as well, if you increase it by the rate of inflation, it ceases to become a minimum wage.
No,
it starts becoming the only wage, and that's the issue that a lot of people have faced over the past, certainly since the last financial crisis, possibly even before.
The problem is, though, you can't remove it. You remove it, it's political suicide.
Someone will have to. Someone will have to have the guts to remove the minimum wage.
It's not going to be Boris. It's not going to be Boris.
Boris won't be in power in 5 years' time if we have a recession, because the argument that Conservatives are fiscally prudent has been thrown out of the window.
It'll either have to be removed, or it needs to go back to its first principle and actually be sectorized. So instead of just having one minimum wage for the entire economy, you need several different minimum wages depending on which industry you work in.
Someone would start moaning about discrimination then.
Yeah.
I'd just get rid of it. I'd say get rid of it and pay you for your economic value. And if your economic value is low, it will encourage you to increase your economical value either through learning a trade or getting educational qualifications. That's ultimately it. And if a company's unwilling to pay you, well, so what? I'll go elsewhere.
However, there are people, once again, I've got someone in mind when I say this, who are unable to perform educational, to progress through education or training or whatever, and these minimum wages offer them just the safety net. Now, I to be honest, yeah, I cut them loose. I would cut them loose if they cannot learn a trade or do anything to progress themselves, and them actually taking up, them being paid not what them worth, like them being overpaid, if anything. It would be very hard to even suggest such a thing, and I can't see in the next five years or even 10 years that actually happening. I could be proven wrong, but I can't see someone coming and saying, "Look, we need to get rid of minimum wage." It's so valued by the average person. It's beyond disbelief.
Such is the curse of New Labour.
Yeah, and New Conservative, which is the Socialist Conservative Party. Bringing everything back then just to the question, because I don't mind getting off on tangents. It sometimes creates much better discussion, right? But ultimately, playing devil's advocate here, right? I would say I think that this is a power grab by the government, and they've been waiting for an opportunity like this. But thanks to the response of the individual, they have made it so goddamn easy to justify it. So the people are about as much to blame for the power the government is assigning itself than the greedy government is themselves to blame for it. So ultimately, there are things that need solving. I think the main one being economical stress. If you take away economical stress, then people stop thinking I and we, and they start thinking about you and me. So there are things that can be tackled going forward with that. But for now, I think it's people are just pure panic. That's all that's happening, and it needs to stop. And one thing that could stop that is the media. They could stop talking about it, or if they're going to talk about it, actually portray the facts. Don't go, oh, boy 24 football coach died of coronavirus. They also failed to mention, of course, in the headline that he already had leukemia.
The thing is, you say like don't listen to the media. The media's already won. We're locked in. We can't go out.
Yeah.
Like to be honest, we're going to be listening to the media a lot more now because we can't go outside. We go outside more than once or twice a day. We're getting arrested or fined.
It's the
not that I actually think
brainwashing
they're going to be able to enforce that. To be quite honest, we've reached a point in British history which has just never been done before. This is uncharted territory.
Well, just I don't know if you caught that or not, Scott, but as Chris just said, it's the ultimate brainwashing experiment.
Yeah.
They've got us right where
everyone's going to go for it, and everyone's going to accept it. They're going to be led up the garden path, and then right off the cliff. I don't know if I said that right, but
I'm not sure what the quote is. Go on, Chris. Sorry.
I was just going to say, someone has put a message on one of my Facebook posts that says 93% of people, according to a YouGov poll, support the action that the government's taken. Is that just turkeys voting for Christmas?
I was just about to say cows being led to the slaughter, so you beat me to it. If they want it, then let them do it, right? But when we're all, this is going to be a bad analogy, right? And I don't want anyone to get offended, but hey ho, when we're all on our way to the chamber, whistling with one another, at least I can be smug enough going, I warned you about this, and at least the person next to me will be going, yeah, but this is not what I wanted. But you allowed it to happen.
I will say this. I now know exactly what's kept Hitler in power for so long.
Yeah.
Based on this scenario.
Yeah.
I do want to add this.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
I do want to add this. I'm not actually worried about okay. Personally, I think it's really bad for society being locked down. As an individual, though, I know that I'll be able to cope with the lockdown, which is why I'm seeing it more as a challenge. Like, I want to see who cracks first. We have from our generation, we have a lot of people with mental health issues. I want to see them crack. I want to see who breaks down. It's watching people and how they react. I find it fascinating just to watch them.
Yeah,
'Cause
but the
I know
government will be
people.
watching us too with this.
Oh
They'll
no,
be
no,
eyeing
yeah,
up. They'll be eyeing up if
100%,
martial law will work.
100%. But what I'm saying is, from a sociology point of view, I want to view how groups react, how individuals also react as well. I guess, like, the ones who we all know someone who says they suffer with depression, anxiety, and a lot of those people are going to break. And I want to see how long it takes for them to break. I want to be able to record it and say, okay, that person broke on day 3 of the lockdown.
Now,
Well,
I don't want to bring it up, Chris, of course, if you don't want to talk about it, but you mentioned something very similar to me just before we started about how, of course, someone who suffers with mental health is going to be
yeah.
affected most by this. If you want to talk about it, by all means.
Well, I suppose I can be the sort of case in point in this respect, because I've had depression, anxiety, suspected psychosis as well, which I thought was quite an interesting one. But this is
Was that the libertarianism?
Well, this was many years ago before I became a libertarian, but
Fair
I've been
enough.
in a much better state of mind now that I'm here at libertarianism.
Glad to hear.
There's that quote from is it The Dark Knight Rises? You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I kind of think that, for people with mental health, I mean, maybe not me, but certainly people like me, being stuck indoors with absolutely nothing to do is going to drive people mad. And I kind of feel as though they're going to be the ones to commit the crimes. They're going to be the ones that are going to end up in prison for really just trying to do what's best for themselves. And there's messages on Facebook earlier on today on some of my posts that's been saying what's good for one is good for all. Well, that's not true. And
100%.
people need to stop bundling everyone into this same boat. We're not all the same. We are different. We have differences. Those differences need to be respected. They need to be addressed, and we need to be able to think for ourselves and act for ourselves.
Obviously, playing devil's advocate here, the counter argument to that is, yeah, but what about, like, the 2% who, obviously, you've got the response of, well, it's 2%, but you will have genuine people saying, like, with love in their hearts, my relative might die if you go outside.
But isn't it ultimately up to the 2% to be responsible for themselves?
That I would agree with. Yeah,
I agree 100%.
If you know someone in your family group is going to be at risk of it, right? Keep them away, and you check yourself.
Yeah.
Yep.
You make sure. If, however, you're living on your own, you're a bachelor with no family, I don't see why you can't go out like normal and go home. I think what we should move on to now is, what kind of country will we have once all this is over?
That's what just on about that.
What this coronavirus has exposed is our weaknesses, which Brexit did not. The pro-Remain side said that it would be Brexit that brings us to our knees, but it did not. It was coronavirus. It's exposed weak supply chains, reliance on imports, a very weak currency, our only option to secure the economy's hyperinflation, and an ever-growing state. Ultimately, we're going to end up in economic depression and quite possibly tyranny in the name of the common good. Is it worth it?
We just
put it this way. Put it this way.
Wow, that's depressing.
Put it this way, James. If we end up in a tyranny, I won't be coming to see you in Derby no more.
Why not?
I'd have to have a pass. I mean, I have to get permission from the Home Office to travel on the trains to come and visit you. I need to know where I am at all times.
I don't say tyranny in the sense of tyrannies that we've experienced in the past, right? But governments always, in the name of common good, use crises to assign themselves more power. And as I said before, unchecked power does ultimately lead to tyranny. But let's get away from the tyranny section. What do you think about the weaknesses that this has exposed of our country?
I think it's hilarious. I think it's hilarious. I really do. I think everyone's. I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of people in this country who are more than happy. I've said it for a very long time, like you know this, James, but a lot of people in this country are more than happy to give up their rights. And I think it's going to come back to eventually bite them on the backside.
So, what's your response into this, sir?
I think what we're going to have is a resurgent political left. I think they've been emboldened by the promises that have been made to the National Health Service, the unlimited magic money tree that the Treasury has now grown for the country. And we're probably going to end up in economic ruin. One crisis will essentially lead to another. So the coronavirus will lead to a financial crisis, which we will be enduring for the entire decade near enough. I think what that will do is force people into sort of coming together in the way that the left would really want. I think that liberty, libertarianism, freedom are all now pretty much on the rocks. I see a very bleak future for any sort of individualism and self-reliance and things like that. And the sort of enterprising values that made Britain great 80 years, even 80 years ago, more so 40 years ago with Thatcher, I think they're just going to be snuffed out entirely in this decade.
Yeah, it's worrying times ahead, I think, and that's ultimately what I wanted this podcast to touch on. Just what you think you want now is not what you needed in 3 months' time. Hindsight is always the perfect gift. And I think in the time of panic and fear, which again I understand why, but in the time of panic and fear, people have gone to the devil for help when they should have just carried on and just trusted in their own instincts, because this ultimately will bite them in the behind. I think that's all we're going to touch on that topic. It was a very depressing, I'm not going to lie, way of putting it. So with that in mind, and we are going on with time, I think I'll end the podcast on this final point and question. Okay. Looking at everything from an analytical position, taking away emotions and feelings, because as Ben Shapiro has famously said, facts do not care about feelings. Is the economic ruin worth it to save such a very small proportion of the population? The worst case scenario is 500,000 deaths in the UK. Now, don't quote me on that. I'm recalling this from Sky News. But the UK population is roughly 66,440,000 people. But because of the response from the government and people, there has been the closure of most of the economically productive part of the economy. This is in turn going to put millions of people into bankruptcy. How is this morally justifiable to save such a small proportion of the population that, as have already been identified, are dying due to underlying health conditions already? All coronavirus has done is exacerbate them. Is it morally justifiable?
Of course not. Not from an economic point of view at all. It's completely illogical.
I would agree entirely. I think that if you look back to the swine flu outbreak of 2009, which for our point right now is a comparable crisis, a lot of people just had what they thought was, a bit of flu during the summer, as I did because I suffered from it. But I didn't have all the tests and everything like that. So the statistics can't be relied upon to tell you an accurate picture anyway.
No.
So
sorry.
to what end are we chasing these as a reliable source of information?
They're probably not reliable, because the reporting aren't they, that this coronavirus has been around maybe as early as December time. I remember it December, January time, right? I kid you not, I had the flu for like 13 days. I thought I'd had a cough and a sore throat, and I thought it gone. Then it came back with sinusitis and another chesty cough, right? But not once did I feel the need to go to the doctor or be tested or anything. We don't know if almost all the population already has been infected, and we're now just seeing the tail end of it. It doesn't make sense to me to shut the entire economy down, as we pointed out before, for maybe 2% of the population, when they should be taking the self-precautions necessary. The people say it's all to save the NHS, but if no one's earning any money, then no one's paying any taxes and our public services are not being paid for. So then everyone ultimately is left to suffer.
So,
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
A good little paradox, isn't it?
Yeah, it's do you want government to borrow it? We're already cutting interest rates. Government has already promised £1 trillion in the budget for infrastructure, and then we'll ignore all the rest of spending on top. But they've definitely surpassed £1 trillion in borrowing. How much more borrowing is justifiable to basically save a very small handful of the population? Now, I don't want to discredit anyone's family members who may die from this. I can understand wholeheartedly how difficult it may be. But ultimately, they were going to die at some point. If they had an underlying health condition that coronavirus has exacerbated, their health exactly wasn't 100% to begin with, so you knew it was coming. And ultimately, how many people have lost a job already?
Well, I'm sat at home.
Same here. Same here.
If not losing their jobs, they're now at least redundant for the next 3 weeks or more.
3 months in my case. I'm redundant for 3 months, so I'm not paying income tax. So that's one less person paying income tax. We'll ignore all the people told to come home. You're like you've just said, temporarily made redundant. Shops have closed. Everywhere has closed. There's no tax coming in. I don't know how they're going to sustain this unless once everyone goes back to work, we're going to see the removal of the tax-free allowance, income tax go up just to service what didn't need to be borrowed. That's what I'm worried about. I'm worried about the long-term effects.
I mean, it seems a bit silly, really. I mean, for most people, this is going to be a bad cough and cold.
Yeah.
And because I had an illness very similar to what's been described at the very beginning of this year, and a lot of people in my workplace did as well.
Yeah. There was a big period where there was a high amount of people being off.
And
I wasn't one of them.
Yeah, I'm in a high risk category because I've got asthma.
Yeah.
Well, I've got asthma as well, and I'll be quite honest. If I got the virus, I'll probably just do what I do if I get the flu. Just sit in bed, don't move.
No, I
Watch
think
TV.
I think I'll just add. I don't have asthma or any underlying health condition. I'm just a bit fat. So at the start, I put that out there. If we're all talking about illnesses and weakness, I'm just a bit fat. I like my cake.
Well, in all fairness, it is mild. It is mild asthma for myself, but like honestly, like I get ill quite often with head cold and stuff like that. Like, who's to say that you haven't had another strain of COVID? Is it called COVID?
COVID-19. That's what we're on now, anyway. 19. There's been 18 strains prior.
Yeah, but who's to say that you haven't had like COVID, like COVID bloody 17 or 16 before? Like at the end of the day, like I get it's a different strain. It's going to get worse. Like it's meant to be worse. But like the thing is, if it is just a mild cold, like no different than some like other types of flu or illnesses, then people are just losing their livelihoods for no reason.
Well, not just that, but governments are being irresponsible, especially with quantitative easing. The American federal government yesterday announced unlimited quantitative easing. Now, this should worry a lot of people because the US dollar is the reserve currency for most of the Western world, and it's about to become worthless. Your McDonald's tickets that you get on the back of your bus pass is going to be worth more as a currency if they carry on, because it's going to hold more value because that ticket's going to be underwritten by the Big Mac.
Well, hyperinflation is never good. Like, it's an extreme example, but look at Germany after World War One.
A million. Was it? Did they have Reichmarks? Were it? Reichmark. Yeah, a million Reichmarks for a loaf of bread. That's what ultimately led to World War II, because the rise of populism, because they saw Hitler as a very strong individual who could bring them back to power and glory. This has been a great discussion and a great first episode. I'd like to thank Scott.
Thank you, James.
I'd like to thank Chris.
Thank you, James. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure having you on today. I'd also like to thank everyone who has been listening to the Conservative Alliance podcast. Before I go, I would appreciate it if you could subscribe to our mailing list on our website, www.conservative-alliance.co.uk, so we can keep you updated when our next podcast is broadcast. Until then, stay tuned for our next episode.